The sound reached them faint at first. A wavering cry carried across the abandoned field. It was not the cry of wind moving through the grass, nor the call of a bird. It was thinner, softer, urgent in its weakness. The rescuers stopped, listening again, their eyes scanning the tall stalks that swayed under the weight of late summer. Then they moved carefully forward, guided by the fragile rhythm that broke the stillness. In the hollow of bent grass, they saw him, a stray dog, ribs rising and falling in shallow breaths, his coat dull with dust, his frame shivering from exhaustion. He did not lift his head when they approached. Instead, he pressed himself closer to the ground, curling his tired body tighter around something hidden beneath. The muffled cry came again, slipping out from the folds of a worn piece of cloth. They crouched slowly, careful not to disturb the animal that guarded the sound. The dog's eyes flickered up, glazed with fatigue but burning with a watchfulness that had not left him. His ears twitched, his muscles trembled. He was starved, weak, yet still holding fast. Between his paws, tucked into the fragile shelter of his chest, lay the smallest of forms, a newborn, skin pale, lips parted as though searching for air. For a long moment, nothing moved. The rescuers barely breathed. The child's whimper faded into silence, and the dog's nose nudged softly against the fabric, as though urging life to stay. His tongue brushed the baby's cheek, gentle and instinctive, then rested again. His head sinking under the weight of his vigil, the rescuers exchanged glances. Quiet words carried on their breath. "Easy now. It's okay." Their voices were low, steady, more like a lullaby than speech. The dog's ears shifted at the sound, but his body remained firm, unyielding, as though every ounce of strength was dedicated to this single duty. The field stretched wide around them, the grass tall and whispering with the movement of insects. Above, the sky held the late light of afternoon, a haze softening its edge. Yet in the circle of trampled stalks, the air felt fragile, suspended between the beating of the fragile hearts one human, one animal, both clinging to survival in their own way. The rescuers could see the sharp outline of the dog's bones pressing against his skin, the hollow shape of hunger pulling at him. Still, he did not move. Each shallow breath brought with it a faint tremor, but he pressed closer against the child, guarding the fragile warmth within the thin blanket. His tail lay still, his eyes half closed from exhaustion, yet his presence was unshaken. One of the rescuers extended a hand, stopping just short of the dog's muzzle. The dog's nostrils flared, testing the air. His lips did not curl. No growl rumbled from his chest, only the steady watch of one who had chosen not to leave. The rescuer's fingers brushed the cloth lightly, pulling it back just enough to see the infant's chest rise with shallow effort. Relief came quiet, unspoken, like the breath of wind stirring the grass. The baby shifted faintly, a tiny hand escaping the cloth, skin against air. The dog's nose followed, pressing gently until the hand curled by reflex, closing over nothing. His eyes remained fixed, unwilling to surrender the small life even to those who came with help. The rescuers waited, giving him time. The dog's chest lifted once, twice, then stilled for a moment that stretched long. Then, with a weary exhale, he allowed the cloth to fall open more fully, revealing the newborn in his care. The choice was slow, reluctant, but real a trust built not by words, but by silence. By the hours he had already spent refusing to leave, the rescuers leaned close, hearing again the faint, uneven cry. One whispered, "We've got you now." The words fell soft into the field, carried on the air dot, and for the first time since they had found him, the dog lowered his head fully to the earth, eyes closing, his flank pressed firm against the fragile child. The cry in the grass had been answered, but the story of how it had been guarded was written in the weary lines of his body, in the simple act of a stray that had chosen to stay when no one else did. The rescuers held still, their presence measured, unwilling to startle the thin body curled so tightly around the child. The dog's flanks lifted in uneven rhythm, each breath shallow, each exhale laced with fatigue. Dust clung to his matted fur, the dull sheen of neglect painting every rib that showed beneath. Yet, his body remained firm against the fragile bundle, pressed close enough that warmth flowed where no blanket could hold it. The baby stirred faintly, a whimper rising from the folds of cloth, answered by the soft nudge of a damp nose. The dog's muzzle lingered there, his breath warm against the child's skin, and the cry eased into stillness again. He shifted, paws edging closer, chest lowered until he was a shield against the late afternoon air. It was not comfort born of strength, but of refusal to let the small life slip away. Time passed in silence, the field alive only with the quiet hum of insects and the muted rustle of grass. The rescuers spoke in whispers, words chosen not to break the fragile bond before them. "Stay, boy. It's all right." Their voices carried low, steady, like ripples across calm water. Still, the dog did not move. His ears flicked at the sound, but his head sank back, his body curling tighter around the infant as though nothing else mattered. The rescuers could see the toe written across him. His limbs trembled when he adjusted his stance, muscles weakened by days without food. His tongue slipped out to wet a cracked nose, then returned to brush against the baby's cheek, leaving a faint trace of moisture before retreating again. The gesture was instinctive, wordless, the kind that came not from strength but from endurance stretched to its edge. One of the rescuers shifted closer, knees pressing into the earth. The dog's eyes opened wide, dull yet steady, and a low whine escaped his throat. Not a warning, not a growl, only the thin sound of an animal torn between fear and duty. His tail remained motionless against the soil, his gaze flicking from the approaching hands back to the infant in his care. The rescuers paused again, their movements slowed. The field's light softened as clouds passed overhead, shadow falling across the small circle of ground. The baby's breath came shallow but steady, each fragile rise of the chest answered by the weight of the dog's flank pressing close. Together, they seemed bound by survival, one too young to stand, the other too weak to walk away. The rescuers waited, letting the moment stretch, understanding that trust could not be hurried. Their hands hovered near, retreating when the dog's body stiffened, offering stillness when his gaze grew sharp again. Patience became its own language, a quiet assurance that the two lives before them would not be taken without care. A breeze stirred the tall grass, bending stalks in slow waves. Dust lifted from the ground, catching the low light. The dog blinked against it, then lowered his head once more, muzzle resting against the baby's chest. The infant shifted faintly, lips parting in a breath so soft it barely reached the rescuer's ears. The dog answered with another whine, softer this time, before his body relaxed fraction by fraction. As though weariness was finally overtaking his watch, the rescuers leaned closer, whispering again, "It's all right. We'll help." The words, quiet as they were, seemed to thread through the dog's exhaustion. He did not move away, nor did he surrender completely. Instead, he pressed one final time against the child, a last measure of warmth before his own strength faltered. His chest rose again, shallow but steady, his body still the shelter of fur and breath that had kept the newborn alive. Through the long hours alone, the rescuers remained in their crouched positions, the air between them and the dog heavy with silence. Hours seemed to have passed in that small circle of grass, though only minutes had gone. Patience was the only way forward. Their hands rested open on their knees, palms turned upward, showing emptiness, showing no threat. Soft words came every so often, spoken into the still air, not meant to coax, but to settle the trembling shape before them. The dog's eyes flicked from one face to another, his gaze returning always to the infant pressed into the crook of his chest. His ears trembled, twitching with every sound beyond the field and insect's wing beat. The faint rattle of wind. He could not spare the energy to move, yet he held still as stone, his ribs rising in shallow pulls, his nose shifting now and then to brush against the baby's skin. The rescuers watched how his body betrayed him. His legs quivered when he tried to adjust, the thinness of his frame leaving little strength for endurance. His paws spread wide in the soil, claws gripping the earth for balance. He leaned forward once, a faint growl forming, but never leaving his throat. Only a vibration that carried more weariness than threat. A hand moved nearer. Fingers stretched to the fabric that wrapped the baby. The dog's head lifted sharply, ear stiff, a low whine pressing from his throat. It was not anger. It was the sound of something stretched too far, of an animal who had guarded beyond his strength and could not bear to let go. His body pressed harder against the infant, chest to chest, his flank trembling with the effort. The rescuers pulled back, leaving the air clear once more. The man closest lowered his hand again to his knee, breathing slow, deliberate. He whispered, "It's all right. Easy now." His tone carried nothing but calm, a rhythm meant to settle more than to command. The dog's ears shifted back, listening, but his gaze did not waver. Time stretched on. The standoff softened only by the baby's shallow cries. Each sound drew the dog's muzzle close again, licking once, twice, then settling back against the fragile chest. The rescuers saw how the newborn's breaths grew steadier in those moments, the warmth of the animal's body keeping what little life remained alive. They understood then that the dog had been the barrier between survival and loss. His exhaustion the price of the baby's fragile pulse. One of the rescuers moved again, this time slower, resting his hand flat against the earth, creeping forward not with urgency but with respect. He did not reach directly for the infant, but extended his hand near the dog's paw, leaving the space for scent and judgment. The dog's nostrils flared, head lowering to breathe in the human smell. His lips twitched, but no snarl followed. His tongue slipped once across his nose, a sign of unease more than defiance. The rescuer froze in place, letting the dog decide. Long seconds passed before the animal blinked, turning back to the child. His chest pressed once more against the tiny bundle, but the tension in his shoulders eased, if only slightly. The rescuers read that small shift not as surrender, but as the beginning of allowance. A crack in the wall of fear that held him, a second rescuer reached for the cloth, fingers brushing the edge near the baby's legs. The dog lifted his head again, ears jerking forward, but his body no longer pressed so tight. Instead, he whined, a sound higher, more fragile, carrying the weight of reluctant trust. His paws shifted in the soil as though preparing to stand, yet his frame sagged too heavy to rise. He stayed where he was, watching, uncertain but not resisting. The cloth loosened, the infant's face exposed to the air. The rescuers leaned close, careful to keep their hands from covering the dog's sight. The baby's skin held the pale flush of cold, lips parted, a shallow breath stirring faintly at intervals. One whispered, "We've got you." The words drifted low, carried more as reassurance to the animal than to themselves. The dog's head lowered again, nose pressing to the child's cheek. One final gesture of possession, of care that had defined his vigil. Then he allowed the rescuers to slide their hands beneath the tiny body, lifting carefully, slowly, until the newborn was cradled in human arms. The dog's eyes widened, ears jerking back, a low sound spilling from his throat. He struggled to rise then, forelegs trembling as he half stood, one paw lifting as though to follow. His whine deepened, urgent, a plea not to lose the life he had guarded. The rescuers paused mid-lift, holding the child against the cloth, letting the dog see that the bundle was safe. Their hands moved with deliberate calm, adjusting the baby's head, checking the small breaths against their fingers. The child stirred faintly, a hand escaping the folds, fingers curling into air. The dog's gaze locked on the movement, his paw lowering again into the soil, his chest shuddering with the release of breath. Still, he edged forward. Each step was labored, the thinness of his legs threatening collapse, but he moved anyway, drawn by the need to stay close. The rescuer shifted back slightly, giving him space. He lowered his head, nose brushing against the baby's leg, whining again as though asking for assurance. The rescuer holding the child bent his arm, letting the cloth drape enough that the dog could press closer. That small concession was to bridge the shared space of trust between them. The rescuer stood slowly, one holding the baby close, the other keeping his hands low, open. The dog rose unsteadily, legs stiff, tail hanging motionless. He followed each step, pressing his nose near, ears twitching with every sound the infant made. His body sagged with the effort, ribs heaving. But he did not falter as they moved through the grass. The rescuer spoke softly, their words weaving into the air like threads meant to hold the fragile moment steady. Easy now. Come on. The dog's ears flicked back, his pace unsteady, but he followed. For every step they took, he pressed one forward too, his frame shivering yet unwilling to give distance. The field opened toward the road where the rescue vehicle waited. The dog's eyes shifted at the sight, confusion breaking through his fatigue. He paused, whining again, his paws rooted in the soil. The rescuer stopped as well, turning to face him, letting him see the child secure in their arms. Their hands lowered slightly, the baby's head angled so the dog could see the tiny breath moving in and out. For a moment, the world held still, the long grass bending in the wind, the distant hum of insects carrying through the air. The dog stood trembling, his body swaying with weakness, his eyes locked on the infant that had been his charge. Then, with a shuddering breath, he stepped forward again, paws dragging but determination stronger than fatigue. He followed them to the roadside, each step carving deeper into his exhaustion. But each step chosen, deliberate, unwilling to let go. When they reached the vehicle, the rescuers placed the baby gently inside, wrapped in thicker cloth, and checked again for breath and warmth. The dog leapt half-heartedly, his front paws striking the metal, but his body too frail to climb. He whined, ears back, eyes searching. A rescuer knelt beside him, hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You can come too," he murmured. The dog leaned into the touch for only a moment, then pressed again toward the baby, his nose brushing the air as though to find him. His tail gave a faint stir, the first movement beyond stillness since the rescuers had found him. It was not joy but release, a soft easing of the tension that had held him through long hours alone. They lifted him carefully, setting him beside the newborn. He lowered himself at once, body curling, his head settling against the child's cloth once again. The rescuers closed the door quietly, stepping back into the stillness of the field they were leaving behind. In that moment, trust had crossed from one world to another. A stray who had nothing had given everything. Strangers with open hands had become the ones to carry what he could no longer hold. And between them lay one fragile life, cradled by both. The vehicle pulled away slowly, leaving the field to its silence once more. In the back, the dog lay still, his body pressed close to the child, his breath shallow but steady. The rescuers watched in the mirror, the fragile bond unbroken. What had begun with hesitation ended with reluctant trust in an animal's duty handed, not surrendered. To human hands, the air in the small clinic was cool, carrying the scent of disinfectant and quiet urgency. Light pooled over the examination table where the infant was laid, wrapped carefully in layers of cloth. The baby's chest rose and fell with a fragile rhythm, each breath shallow, almost invisible, as if life itself hovered on the edge of staying. Around the table, doctors bent low, their movements precise, their words hushed, carried only between them by the doorway. The dog had been set down gently on the tiled floor. His body sagged as though the strength that had kept him standing had finally drained away. Now that others held the burden, his legs folded beneath him, ribs rising in a quick, tired rhythm. His eyes did not leave the child, though the distance between them felt unbearable. Every cry, every small sound that escaped the baby drew his ears upright again. His body struggling to respond even as exhaustion pinned him down, the rescuers kept near. One kneeling close, a hand brushing once along the dog's head. The animal flinched at first, then stilled, the faintest tremor running through him. His gaze flicked briefly to the touch, but his focus returned almost instantly to the table. His head pressed against the floor, his nose twitching faintly. Catching the scent that was slipping further from reach, the doctors worked steadily. A stethoscope pressed against the tiny chest, another hand checking temperature, another warming blankets to cocoon fragile limbs. Every action was quiet, careful, measured, as though the smallest rush might disrupt the balance. Heartbeats there, faint but there. One murmured. Their voices carried the weight of restraint, the kind born from long practice, where hope could not be spoken to loudly. The baby stirred. Fingers flexed weakly, curling against the fabric. The dog's ears snapped forward, his eyes widening as though he felt the movement even from across the room. A soft whine rose from his throat, thin but urgent, pressing into the air like a plea. He shifted his body forward, claws scraping faintly against the tile. His legs trembled with the effort of rising, but his frame lifted an inch, then dropped again. His body refusing what his will demanded, the rescuers placed a steadying hand against his side, whispering low, "Easy, boy, they're helping." The words seemed to settle him, though his chest heaved faster, his body pressing against the floor as if trying to bridge the gap through sheer closeness. Minutes stretched into a fragile eternity. The baby's breath came shallow still, but the rhythm grew steadier. A faint cry broke the silence, thin, wavering, but strong enough to fill the room. The doctors paused, their eyes lifting briefly toward one another. Unspoken relief shared in silence. The infant's fingers curled again, grasping blindly at air, holding nothing but proving presence nonetheless. The sound struck the dog like a spark. His head lifted sharply, ears rigid, body trembling with sudden energy that exhaustion could not hold back. His tail, still for hours, gave a faint stir. It tapped once against the tile, then again, the sound soft yet unmistakable. The rescuers turned at the noise, watching as life returned not only to the child but to the animal who had guarded him. The baby's cries steadied, stronger now, filling the quiet space with proof of survival. Each sound made the dog's tail lift a little higher, tapping more firmly, his body leaning forward until his paws scraped once more at the floor. His nose lifted, scenting the air that carried the child's breath. His eyes shone not with joy but with release, the loosening of something wound too tight through long hours of watch. The doctors continued their work, wrapping the infant in warmed cloth, checking the color of his skin, pressing gently at his chest. One lifted him, holding the small body upright for a moment, patting lightly to clear the lungs. Another leaned close, listening again for the steady rhythm within. The newborn's cry answered, thin but growing, echoing off the clinic's walls like a fragile declaration. The dog whined again, his voice softer now, carrying less strain. His body sagged back to the ground, but his tail continued its tapping rhythm, a slow beat that matched the child's breaths. His ribs still showed sharp, his frame still hollow, yet a shift had come. The life he had shielded was not slipping away. It was strengthening, gathering itself in the hands of those who could carry it further. The rescuers spoke quietly among themselves, one leaning close to murmur, "He's stronger already. Their tone was hushed, not celebratory, but cautious, protective of the fragile line between life and loss. They moved around the dog again, one offering a bowl of water. The animal lifted his head, nostrils twitching, then bent weakly forward to drink. His tongue touched the surface once, then again, each lap slow, labored, as though even thirst had been forgotten until this moment. Still, even as he drank, his eyes never left the child. Each sound from the table drew his ears forward again. His tails beat faltering only when silence stretched. He finished, lifting his head, muzzle wet, and lowered himself back into watch, body pressed low. Eyes unblinking, time passed in the steady hum of work and breath. The baby's limbs stretched faintly, fingers curling around the edge of cloth. The doctors exchanged small nods, their movements easing into steadiness. One lifted the newborn higher, settling him carefully into a safer cradle. The child's cry rang out once more, stronger now, filling the room with sound that no one dared interrupt. The dog's tail struck the floor again, harder this time, a steady tap-tap like a drumbeat of quiet release. His body still trembled with weakness, his bones still sharp beneath his skin. But the sound marked the return of something more than survival. He had carried life into this space, and now it lived, and in that moment, he shared in it. The rescuers watched, their expressions softened by the sight. One crouched again beside the dog, hand brushing once more across his head. "You did good," he whispered. The dog pressed into the touch briefly, then shifted back, ears twitching. His eyes still locked on the infant. The clinic settled into silence. Machines clicked softly. Blankets rustled. The baby's breath smoothed into a rhythm steady enough to calm every movement around him. The dog lay stretched at the threshold, body no longer straining but resting, ears still vigilant. His tail tapped one final time, then stilled, not from fear but from peace. The rescuers knew he would not close his eyes, not while the child remained near. He had chosen his place at the door, and there he would stay, weak but unyielding, as though the bond could not be severed by walls or a distance. Outside, the evening settled, the last light bending low across the horizon. Inside, the fragile heartbeats, one of a newborn, one of a strain moved in rhythm. The miracle was not loud, not sudden, but quiet and steady, stitched together by endurance and care. At that moment, the clinic held more than survival. It held a second heartbeat, one that had been guarded through exhaustion and hunger, one that now answered with its own fragile strength. And the dog, lying by the door, felt it in the only way he could through the stir of his tail, tapping softly against the floor. The night had been long, filled with careful hands and the fragile rhythm of survival. By dawn, the newborn's breathing had steadied into a gentle rise and fall, each soundless movement enough to calm the weary faces gathered around him. Wrapped now in thicker blankets, warmed and fed, he lay in the safety of a small cot beside the clinic wall. The faint scent of milk hung in the air, mingling with the sharp cleanliness of the room. At the door, the dog had not moved far from where he had been placed. His body had given into exhaustion during the night, lying stretched across the cool floor. His breath shallow but steady. His ears twitched at every sound from the cot, a whimper, a stir, and each time he lifted his head, checking that the life he had guarded remained. His tail moved now, and then, a weak brush against the tile, as if the rhythm of the baby's breath reached through the room and touched him still. The rescuers came and went, their steps soft, their voices kept low. One paused by the doorway where the dog lay, a hand lowering gently to stroke the patch of fur along his neck. The dog did not shift away, though his body stiffened briefly at the touch. He blinked slowly, then let his head settle back to the floor. For the first time, his eyes closed without snapping open again at the baby's cry. He rested, not in surrender, but in the certainty that others now held the burden he had carried alone. The hours passed. Light grew stronger beyond the thin windows, flooding the room in pale gold. The doctors leaned close to the infant, nodding quietly among themselves. "He's stable now," one whispered. Relief softened their faces, though they moved with the same quiet restraint as before. No one spoke loudly. No one disturbed the stillness that had carried both child and animal through the night. The rescuers prepared the baby's journey into care, arranging soft cloth, checking every sign of health, recording details with steady pens. The dog watched each movement, his eyes following whenever the newborn was lifted. His ears twitched, his body shifting as though preparing to rise. But each attempt left him sagging back again. His ribs showed still, his muscles thin from hunger, but his will to remain was undimmed. One rescuer carried the baby gently toward the door. The dog pushed himself upright, legs trembling as they stretched beneath him. He staggered forward a step, paws dragging, nose lifting to scent the air as the child passed. His tail stirred faintly, his body swaying, but his eyes stayed locked on the bundle in human arms. The rescuer paused, lowering the cloth just enough for the dog to lean close. His nose brushed the fabric, lingering for a moment before he pulled back. A soft whine rose from his chest, quiet but insistent. The rescuer murmured, "He's safe now." The words were simple, spoken not to reassure themselves, but to acknowledge the bond that had carried them here. The dog blinked, ears shifting back, and then lowered himself once more, body folding to the ground in a posture of weary release. When the baby was carried outside into the waiting vehicle, the dog struggled again to follow. His legs faltered, but the rescuers lifted him, setting him gently onto the seat beside the cot prepared for the child. He laid down instantly, curling once more toward the small shape, as though the bond could not be broken by doors or distance. His head settled against the edge of the blanket, his breath warming the air near the infant's cheek. The rescuers closed the door softly, the morning light spilling across the two of them as the vehicle pulled away from the clinic. The road was quiet, winding through fields brushed by dawn. Mist clung to the low ground, lifting in slow veils as the sun rose higher. Inside, the baby slept, and the dog lay unmoving, ears flicking at every rustle, tail stirring faintly when the infant shifted. His ribs rose in slow rhythm, exhaustion still etched into every line of him. But his presence remained unbroken at the care center. The child was placed in the arms of waiting nurses. Their movements were practiced, yet their faces softened as they looked down at the newborn who had survived the night. Against every odds, the dog remained at the threshold once more, his body low, eyes unblinking. He rose only when the child was carried from one room to another, following step by step until his paws threatened to give beneath him. The rescuer stayed close, one hand always steadying him, guiding without force. The baby would be cared for now, surrounded by human hands that could give what the stray had given without food or shelter warmth. Safety, endurance. But the dog was not forgotten. His story had become bound to the child's, his vigil etched into the minds of those who had witnessed it. They spoke softly among themselves, agreeing he would not be left to the streets again. A place had been prepared for him where he would no longer know hunger, where the weight of survival would no longer rest solely on his bones. That as days passed, the child gained strength. His cries filled the rooms with steady sound, his limbs stretching, his fingers curling around the hands that cradled him. And each time, the dog answered, ears rising, tail stirring faintly as if each sign of life returned something lost within himself. His body remained frail, but food, water, and care began to restore what hunger had taken. His coat grew less dull, his eyes brighter, though the watchful depth in them never softened. The rescuers often paused to watch him, lying near the child's cot, his head resting against the floor, his gaze never straying far. "Guardian," one whispered one morning, the word spoken like a quiet acknowledgement rather than a name. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, though he did not move. His bond was not of names, but of presence, unspoken yet unyielding. When at last the time came to leave the center, the dog was led out into the morning air. The sun had risen fully now, spilling across the fields in long bands of light. He walked with unsteady but steadying steps, his ribs less sharp, his tail no longer still. The rescuers moved beside him, speaking low, their pace slow enough for him to keep. He paused once, turning his head toward the horizon. The field stretched wide, the grass bending under the touch of the wind. Birds stirred in the distance, their calls carrying faintly across the open sky. The dog stood still, his body lifted by the sunlight, his breath visible in the cool air. Then he stepped forward again, his paws pressing into the earth with a steadiness that had not been there before. The baby was safe, cared for, held in human arms that would carry him into a future beyond the fields where he had been found. The dog, too, had been given a place, no longer a stray but a guardian remembered. His story lingered not in words, but in the simple truth of what he had done choosing to stay, when leaving might have been easier, giving warmth when none was left to give that as the dawn spread across the land. The animal walked into the light, his steps quiet, his body steady. The rescuers followed at a distance, letting him lead. Wind moved through the grass, bending it in long, graceful arcs. In the hush of morning, the memory of his vigil remained, etched into the silence he left behind. And so he went on, no longer lost, no longer alone, carrying with him the story of devotion written not in sound but in breath, in warmth, in the soft stirring of a tail that had tapped once against the floor when life returned.